Before the towers of silver and gold, before the bright banners, before the walls of Quel'Thalas caught the morning sun, there was a forest. Not empty, not forgotten, not waiting to be claimed. It had names before the elves gave it new ones. It had roads before their stones were laid. It had graves before their songs were sung. And in that forest lived a people who never accepted that memory could be erased by a map. The Amani.
You call it a kingdom. We called it home. You call it history. We called it warning. You call us enemies.
That is the question we are not supposed to ask. What if the Amani were right? Not in every war, not in every blade drawn, not in every drop of blood spilled beneath the trees, but right about the wound. Right to remember what stood before Quel'Thalas. Right to refuse the comfort of a story written only by those who survived to decorate the page. Come, sit by the fire a moment. The road through old forests is easier with company, and a little brew to keep the chill from the bones. I am Someguy, brewmaster, wanderer, listener of old stories, and tonight we walk carefully, because this is not a tale of clean heroes and simple villains. No, no. Those tales are easy, too easy. This is a tale about memory, about land, about pride, about grief that lived so long it sharpened itself into a spear. The elves remember Quel'Thalas as a miracle, a kingdom of light, magic, beauty, and survival. The Amani remember it differently. And if we are brave enough to listen, not agree, not excuse, but listen, then perhaps the forest still has something to teach us.
In the northern forests, the exiled elves founded a new home. Through discipline, courage, and mastery of the arcane, they raised Quel'Thalas from wilderness into splendor. They built towers. They planted banners. They defended their people from savage enemies who struck from the shadows. For generations, the Amani trolls threatened the peace of the elven kingdom. Their hatred was old, their attacks relentless. Thus, Quel'Thalas endured.
That is the version many know. A noble kingdom, a dangerous enemy, a people defending their home from forces that would see it fall. And there is truth in it. The elves did suffer. Their homes burned, their families died, their borders were stained with blood. No honest telling of this story can pretend otherwise. But truth can be true and still incomplete. A polished shield reflects only what stands before it. Turn it slightly, and the light changes. So let us turn the shield. Before Quel'Thalas had walls, the Amani had memory. They were not a rumor hiding between trees. They were not beasts waiting outside civilization. They were a people. They had kings, they had rights, they had sacred places. They had stories passed from elder to child beneath canopies older than many kingdoms. And then came the elves. To the elves, perhaps the land looked like promise, a place to begin again, a place to build something beautiful after exile and wandering. But to the Amani,
They did not find empty land. They found our hunting paths, our stones, our dead. They found old fires still warm beneath the ash, and they said, "This will be ours."
Now imagine that. Not as a soldier, not as a ruler, not as someone reading from a clean page in a royal archive. Imagine it as a child of the forest. One day, the trees your ancestors named are marked by another people's survey lines. The ruins your elders warned you never to disturb are studied, claimed, renamed. The borders you never needed to draw are suddenly drawn for you. And when you resist, you are called savage. This is where the wound begins. Not with the last battle, not with the loudest war cry, not with the name of the most famous chieftain. The wound begins when one people says, "We have arrived," and another people answers, "You arrived on our bones." That does not make every Amani action righteous. No. A wound can be real and still become poisoned. A grief can be justified and still grow cruel. But if we only judge the poison and never ask how the wound was made, then we are not studying history. We are polishing a weapon.
You built roads through our silence. You raised towers above our graves. You taught your children to fear our faces. Then you asked why we hated you. You called our rage ancient, as if age made it foolish. But what is a kingdom if not a memory protected by walls? What is a throne if not a story people agree to defend? We defended ours with tusk, spear, and blood. You defended yours with spell, steel, and song. Tell me, elf, which of us was history supposed to forgive?
There it is. The question beneath the question. Not, were the Amani peaceful? They were not always peaceful. Not, were the elves evil? They were not simply evil. The better question is harder. Can a people be wrong in what they do and still right about what was done to them? Now we must be careful, very careful, because pain is a dangerous cup. Drink too deeply, and it starts to taste like permission. The Amani may have carried a true grievance. They may have remembered a theft others preferred to forget. They may have looked upon Quel'Thalas and seen not beauty, but occupation wearing golden robes. But grief does not bless every blade. Memory does not excuse slaughter. A child born behind elven walls did not choose where those walls were raised. A farmer in the shadow of Silvermoon did not personally carve the first border through Amani land. And yet, when hatred grows old enough, it stops asking who is guilty. It only asks who is near. That is where remembrance becomes vengeance. That is where a people fighting for the past can begin destroying the future.
We buried our dead as well. Do not speak as though only the forest mourned. Our children learned the sound of horns in the night. Our gates were sealed by fear. Our songs remember fires, raids, and blood beneath the leaves. If the Amani call us thieves, then what name do we give those who came with axes to our doors? If they remember loss, so do we. If they claim grief, so do we.
And that is true too.
This is the knot, friends. The elves are not merely conquerors in shining halls. They are survivors. They have known exile. They have known invasion. They have known the horror of losing nearly everything and still being expected to stand. Their grief is real, but so is the Amani grief. Two wounds can face each other for so long that each forgets it is looking at pain. It only sees an enemy.
And then there is Zul'Aman. Not just a fortress, not just a battlefield, not just a place where adventurers once tested their courage and counted their victories. Zul'Aman is memory made stone. Every broken step says, "We were here." Every idol says, "We had gods before your spires touched the sky." Every vine-covered wall says, "You may forget us, but the earth has not." To outsiders, ruins often look like endings. To the people who built them, ruins are accusations. They ask, who let this fall? Who profited from its silence? Who told the next generation we were only monsters? That is why old places are dangerous. Not because they hold ghosts, because sometimes they hold the truth. And now shadow gathers over the old forests again. A new darkness reaches for ancient wounds. That is what darkness does. It does not need to invent hatred. It only needs to find the hatred already waiting. A border dispute becomes a holy war. A memory becomes a command. A grave becomes a banner. And if the old hatred between Amani and Elf still burns beneath the roots of Quel'Thalas, then the coming night will not need to conquer the forest. It will only need to whisper.
They took, they built, they forgot. Remember. Rise. Take back what was buried.
They are coming again. They have always been coming. Raise the wards. Seal the gates. Trust no shadow beneath the trees. Do you hear it? Not the truth. The trap. The old wound being opened by hands that care nothing for either side. So what happens if the forest is forced to remember? What happens if the elves must look at Quel'Thalas and ask not only, what did we build, but what did our building cost? And what happens if the Amani must look at their own past and ask not only, what was taken, but what have we become trying to reclaim it? That is not weakness. That is the first honest step toward anything that deserves to be called peace. Peace without truth is only silence with better manners. And silence does not heal old forests. It only lets the roots grow around the bones. So here is the heart of the theory. The Amani were not right because every war they fought was noble. They were not right because every act of vengeance was justified. They were not right because rage is sacred simply because it is old. No. The Amani may have been right because the wound was real. They may have been right that Quel'Thalas was not born from empty land. They may have been right that their history was pushed beneath elven stone, elven song, and elven memory. They may have been right to say, "We were here before you." But being right about the wound does not make one wise about the cure. And perhaps that is the tragedy. A people can remember the truth so fiercely that they turn it into a cage. A kingdom can defend its beauty so fiercely that it refuses to see the shadow beneath its own foundation. And between them, generation after generation, the forest drinks blood. I have learned something on long roads. When two travelers argue over who owns the fire, neither notices that both are cold. The Elves and the Amani have spent ages telling different stories about the same land. One story says, "We built a home." The other says, "You built it on ours." One story says, "We survived your hatred." The other says, "You named our grief hatred, so you would not have to answer it." And somewhere beneath both stories is the forest itself, older than the banners, older than the wars, older than the names carved into maps. Perhaps the forest does not care who claims it. Perhaps it remembers all of them. This is only the first cup. There are more stories waiting in the leaves. We still have to speak of Zul'Aman, not as a simple monster, not as a simple hero, but as something far more dangerous. A symbol. We still have to walk the roads of Quel'Thalas and ask whether beauty can be innocent when built on contested ground. We still have to enter Zul'Aman and listen for what the stones remember. And we still have to ask whether the coming darkness might force enemies to do the one thing neither side has wanted to do. Tell the truth. Not the pretty truth. Not the useful truth. Not the truth that fits neatly on a banner. The whole truth. The kind that burns going down. The kind that might yet heal. So were the Amani right? Maybe not in their wars. Maybe not in their hatred. Maybe not in every spear thrown from the shadow of the trees. But perhaps they were right to remember. Perhaps they were right to refuse the lie that nothing stood there before Quel'Thalas. Perhaps they were right to carry the names others wanted buried. And perhaps the great sorrow of the Amani is not that they remembered too much, but that their memory was left alone with rage for far too long. Perhaps the Amani were not wrong to remember. Perhaps they were wrong only in what they did with that memory. This tale is an unofficial fan-made speculative story created for entertainment, discussion, and creative exploration. All referenced characters, places, peoples, settings, and lore belong to their respective rights holders. This story is not official history. It is not intended to replace, alter, or claim ownership over any established law. Any resemblance to real people, real places, or real events is coincidental. Thank you for listening, friends. May your cup stay full and your stories stay honest.